So, in order to give the backstory of this series, I'm actually going to have to cover an event that I've talked about so many times on this show, I don't know if I could ever actually review it. Avengers Disassembled.
Okay, not Avengers Disassembled per se, but rather the event's tie-in stories. Marvel used the story to push a new creative direction for several series. Fantastic Four got a new creative team. Iron Man and Captain America got relaunched, while Captain America and the Falcon, Spectacular Spider-Man, and Thor would be cancelled. Thor's story would prove to be the most effective as Thor returned to Asgard to find the land decimated and his fellow gods either dead or dying. Realizing the climactic battle of Ragnarok was upon Asgard, Thor set out to end the battle before any more was lost. Eventually, Thor had made his way to the Yggdrasil, the Tree of Life, and discovered that the only way to stop Ragnarok would be to break the cycle altogether. So Thor severed Asgard from the Yggdrasil, sending the realm into a limbo void and forever breaking the cycle of Ragnarok. That is, until Marvel needed to do another Ragnarok story a few years later.
Now, Marvel had always intended to bring Thor back, they just needed to find the right way to do so. While on a creative retreat in early 2006, Joe Quesada was pitched a story by writer Mark Millar and artist Greg Land about fragments of Asgard coming down and falling to Earth around a small town in Oklahoma. Quesada liked the idea, but there were complications involved.
Namely that Miller and Land were already working on a book, Ultimate Fantastic Four, that was already having issues meeting deadlines. Since Marvel wanted their new Thor series to be spun off from the Civil War event, this meant that a new creative team would be needed to handle the pitch.
The decision was made to have the Thor relaunch be written by J. Michael Straczynski and drawn by artist Olivier Coipel.
Straczynski was a name that carried quite a bit of weight behind it. JMS, as his fans called him, had written so many things like the definitive origin for the DC Comics hero Cyborg, to TV series as varied as He-Man and She-Ra, to the real Ghostbusters and Murder, She Wrote. Then in 1993, JMS launched his magnum opus, Babylon 5. The show pioneered the idea of using serialized storytelling to tell a grand epic space opera. This really wasn't done in American TV at the time. The series won multiple awards, though it was never really a huge hit, and it developed a cult following. It paved the way for shows like 24, Lost, Heroes, and Game of Thrones. In early 2001, JMS came to Marvel to take over the Amazing Spider-Man title. His run included delving into the mystical side of Spidey's powers, introducing new characters like Ezekiel and the vampiric Morlun along the way, and having Aunt May discover her nephew's secret identity as Spider-Man. However, the run has been overshadowed by its final story, One More Day, which is widely regarded as one of the worst comic storylines ever.
Straczynski was also writing the Fantastic Four at the time, so the seeds for Thor's return would actually be planted in a storyline titled The Hammer Falls.
Unlike the Miller-Land pitch, the only artifact to fall down outside of Broxton, Oklahoma would be Thor's hammer Mjolnir. This attracted the attention of the military, the Fantastic Four, and Dr. Doom. Several individuals, including the Thing, tried to pick up the hammer, but none proved worthy of wearing the mantle of Thor. That is, until in the midst of a scuffle between the FF and the military, a man holding a backpack with the initials DP scooped up Mjolnir and slipped away.
DB stood for Donald Blake, who was an ordinary human doctor that had the soul of Thor. Just calm down. Calm down. You can get this done. Just get it done, okay? DB stood for Donald Blake, who was an ordinary doctor who had the soul of Thor grafted onto him by Odin, who was trying to teach his son some humility. Blake's leg had been damaged, and this resulted in a permanent limp that necessitated the use of a walking stick. While on vacation in Norway, Blake witnessed an alien invasion occurring, and he hid out in a cave where he found a peculiar-looking walking stick. Striking that walking stick against a wall revealed it to be Mjolnir, and Thor's powers were soon returned to him. Thor had used the dual identity of Donald Blake and Thor until Odin eventually separated the two and Blake was sent off into the void. So in other words, Donald Blake popping back up again meant that Thor would not soon be far behind. And that sets the stage for today's story. So here is the 2007 relaunch of Thor, Volume 1.
Donald Blake contacts Thor in the Void and explains that when Thor severed Asgard away from the Yggdrasil, it allowed Donald to exit the Void and return to Earth. Blake implores Thor to return to Earth, pointing out that Ragnarok is broken, meaning that Thor need not worry about it anymore. but finally convinces Thor as news that the spirits of other Asgardians have been detected on Earth. With that, Thor reclaims Mjolnir and proclaims his desire to live. A few days later, Donald Blake picks up a familiar-looking walking stick as he makes his way to Broxton. After checking into a motel, Blake strikes the stick against the ground, and the citizens of Broxton are surprised by a massive thunderclap on a sunny day. The next day, after breakfast at the local diner, Donald ventures to a large empty field. He summons Thor again and reminds the Thunder God that where Thor is, Asgard is. Thor begins swinging Mjolnir around and summons enough Norse magic to build a new Asgard in the middle of the field. This activity has attracted the attention of the sheriff, who drives out with a deputy to talk to Thor. The sheriff points out that Thor is on private land and thus can't be building on it. Thor responds by using his magic to levitate the new Asgard off of the ground. Intimidated, the two officers sink back into Broxton. Later, Thor is visited by the owner of the land who he just gouged. The man points out the damages cost quite a bit of money to him, so Thor allows the man to withdraw as much gold and jewels from the Asgardian treasury as he possibly can. As the man happily leaves, Thor begins trying to locate other Asgardians.
Okay, explanation time for the next part of this story. During Marvel's Civil War event, Iron Man debuted a new genetically engineered android, just go with it, that looked like Thor. This being, dubbed Clor by the fans, clone of Thor, appeared and then proceeded to kill Bill Foster, aka the hero Goliath. Ever since Clor popped up, fans were left wondering what would happen when Thor returned and would eventually cross paths with his old friend Tony Stark.
Thor arrives in a section of New Orleans that's still severely damaged from Hurricane Katrina. He's immediately accosted by a man who wondered where the Thunder God was during the storm. Thor starts to respond when Iron Man arrives. Stark points out that much has changed since Thor left, and the US government isn't too happy about Asgard now being smack dab in the middle of the country. If Thor wants to get on the government's good side, he better sign the Superhero Registration Act and start working for the government. Thor isn't having any of it. He summons a lightning bolt that fries Stark's armor and begins pounding away with Mjolnir. Thor then gives Tony a message: leave him be, or face a true wrath of a Thunder God. Thor then states that at some point he and Tony are going to have to discuss what happened with Clor. Thor returns to the man from earlier. He recognized something familiar, sensing two souls within one body. Thor begins calling on Asgardian magic as he takes hold of the man. A whirlwind kicks up to reveal the ever-loyal Heimdall. Sometime later, Donald Blake is in the war-torn African nation of Dhahran, working for Doctors Without Borders. This is where Blake has been working while waiting for Thor's return. After helping several refugees, Blake meets three aid workers, Miller, Newley, and Kincaid. The three explain that the camp has been attacked by militants from the Nagre tribe, and this is responsible for all of the strife in Dhahran. As if on cue, the Nagre attack the camp. The three aid workers leap into action, picking up firearms and standing up to the attackers. Blake admires the trio's bravery in the face of adversity as he calls on Thor. Thor arrives and makes quick work of the militants. Afterwards, Thor talks with Newley, Miller, and Kincaid. He sensed the presence of friends from long ago and calls on the magic of Asgard once more. This reveals Volstagg, Fandral, and Hogun, the Warriors Three. The chief of the camp then asks the four to leave, fearing that their presence will attract more violence, and they honor his request, but not until Thor opens a large chasm, making any further land attacks from the Nagre more difficult.
So who are these returning Asgardians? Well, first and foremost, you might recognize Heimdall as the guardian of the Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that connected Asgard to the 8 other realms. Now, obviously, he doesn't look much like Idris Elba, but yes, this is still Heimdall. Now, the Warriors Three are some of Thor's closest allies, often being the first to come to aid him in battle. There's Volstagg, whose gregariousness is matched only by his strength, Fandral, the swashbuckling romantic rogue, and Hogun, the short-tempered pessimist. The trio's personality quirks actually work to each other's benefits, and like I said, they do often come to Thor's aid. There is one Asgardian, though, that Thor is seeking above all others, and that would be Sif, Heimdall's sister. Sif often also accompanies Thor into battle, being one of the first to join him, and is also an on-again, off-again romantic interest for the Thunder God.
Over the next few days, Thor locates and awakens more Asgardians, and Asgard receives a mailbox, along with an invite to a town hall meeting in Broxton. Thor gets a message from Heimdall about multiple Asgardian souls being held prisoner in an abandoned bomb shelter not too far from Broxton. Thor manages to locate the shelter and makes his way inside. There he finds one woman taking a particular note of his arrival. Before he can free anyone, Thor is greeted by the one holding the people hostage, the Destroyer Armor.
The Destroyer Armor was constructed by Odin out of an unknown alien metal. Now, the armor does have some independent movement, but more often than not, it's used by the likes of Loki as a weapon against Thor, and has proven to be quite difficult to destroy, though it hasn't been completely eradicated.
Thor begins fighting the destroyer armor to little avail. The armor goes as far as to even refer to Thor as the true destroyer. Thor and Blake begin to piece together that the armor's plan is to prevent any more resurrections by killing the human hosts of Asgardian souls. Thor manages to take the battle topside and uses Asgardian magic to awaken the souls, even that which was piloting the armor. Thor approaches the down armor and confronts the pilot, who reveals himself to be Balder the Brave.
Balder is Thor's half-brother, and though he does usually aid Thor in battle sometimes, it's not always by choice. Balder actually renounced killing at one point. And it's because of this pacifism streak that he does have something of a strained relationship with a lot of the other Asgardians.
Balder explains that he too was left in the void after Ragnarok. He was increasingly upset over his failure in the battle when something began to pilot his soul into the destroyer armor. Balder reluctantly thanks Thor before heading off to Asgard. Meanwhile, Thor is told by someone that the woman from before wishes to speak to him. Thor eagerly rushes back into the shelter, hoping to finally be reunited with his lady Sif. However, he's not greeted by a resurrected Sif. Instead, it's a resurrected Loki.
Suddenly, millions of fangirls cried out in anguish, and were then silenced.
Thor is none too pleased by his adopted brother's trickery, but Loki points out the cycle of Ragnarok is broken, meaning this is a fresh start for her as well. Thor reluctantly agrees to let Loki stay at Asgard on a zero-tolerance basis. Which, of course, means Loki has already begun plotting against Thor by aligning herself with Doctor Doom. Meanwhile, the Asgardians arrive at the Broxton Town Hall meeting with Volstagg looking for cake. Over the next few weeks, the citizens of Broxton begin to adjust to the sudden surge in population. One rancher relates a story of Hogan assisting him with a flat tire, and Bill, the cook at the local diner, relates a story of meeting a goddess named Kenda and instantly becoming smitten. As this is happening, Blake is holding an inner mind conversation with Thor. Thor has a plan to resurrect Asgardians all over the globe. There's just one thing holding him back: Odin. Thor is trying to turn over a new leaf for Asgard, and he fears that bringing back his father would just bring back the old ways because Odin just is too reliant upon them.
And if you recall my favorite self review, you know that Thor's pretty much on the nose here.
Blake points out that the longer Thor waits, the greater the chances that an unresurrected Asgardian, like, say, Sif, could, say, have a fatal heart attack, or get shot, or have some other calamity befall them. Finally, Thor relents and flies up into the atmosphere. He then calls forth all of his Asgardian magic and begins resurrecting Asgardians all over Earth. The magic proves to be too much, though, and Thor winds up passing out and falling back to Earth.
And so concludes Volume 1 of the 2007 relaunch of Thor. How was it? This is a top-notch book. J. Michael Straczynski does a really good job of telling small stories within a much larger story. You feel like you get a good complete read for most of it, and it just follows through. There's some great characterization from Thor. I do love the citizens of Broxton. I think they're really quirky and kind of funny, and having to suddenly adjust to a bunch of Norse deities moving into their town. And there's some top-level artwork from Olivier Coipel. That being said, the book is not entirely without faults. There is a real lack of villains in this. I mean, the most prominent villain is probably Iron Man. I know you don't want to throw in all the old villains all at once, but it would have been nice to see one of the lesser Thor villains like the Absorbing Man or the Wrecking Crew pop up. I think that could have helped bolster the story. And I know this is kind of early on, but the Asgardians are a little underdeveloped. And again, this is the first volume of the story, so obviously there's more to come after that. But again, for this part, they're a little lacking. With that in mind, though, those are minor quibbles. So I'm going to give Thor, Volume 1 by J. Michael Straczynski an A. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review. Just a second. I got two here.
Hey guys, want to recommend a book to be placed in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box? Well, check out my Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytime for Cap Productions, or just check the link in the description below and see how you can help make that happen.